Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik K. We pick up today in the midst of Siman Tov Kuf Chav Vav. We're up to Sif Ches on Kuf Mem Zayin Amid Beis. Hopefully we will be learning today Kuf Mem Zayin Amid Beis and a good piece of Kuf Mem Ches Amid Aleph. We're continuing, of course, to learn the halachas that pertain to handling a niftar, a mace, on Yom Tov. Says the Mechaber, Im noida livnei ir achas, if the people of a city find out, if it becomes known to them, she Yisrael meis rachok misham arba chamisha yamim, that there is a Yid Nebach who died, and there's a mace, a niftar, that is laying and not being attended to, a distance of 4 or 5 days away from the city. V'lo nitan lekvura, and nobody is attending to this mace, and the mace is not being brought to Kfura. Even though, if the people find out about this on Yom Tov, and they now go travel to that city, they're not going to be able to do the Kfura on Yom Tov. The mace is 4 or 5 days away. So definitely they're not going to get there until after Yom Tov, and the Kfura is going to be after Yom Tov. Now, if you remember, back in Sif Daled, in Sif Daled, let's see where it is. In Sif Daled, that's on Kuf Mem Vav Amid Beis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines up from the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber said, when do we have all of these heterim of the different types of malacha that we're allowed to do on behalf of the mace, depending on if it's Yom Tov Rishon or Yom Tov Sheni? When do we have these heterim? The Mechaber said, "Ba'med dvar mamurim kisharoitzim lekavroi boy b'yoyim." The only time you have a heter to do the malacha, whether it's malacha daraisa or malacha darabanan, in order to attend to a mace, that's only if you're intending on making the kvura on Yom Tov. If the kvura is not going to be on Yom Tov, so then why are you doing malacha on Yom Tov? Wait until after Yom Tov. Now over here, we have to travel 4 or 5 days to the mace, so definitely we're not making this kfura today. Yet, the Mechaber says over here in Sif Ches, even though you're not going to reach the mace until after Yom Tov, still, mutter lotzeis laderech b'Yom Tov Sheni. If you find out about this mace and now it's Yom Tov Sheni, you're allowed to go travel on Yom Tov Sheni in order to go take care of the mace after Yom Tov, kedei lemaher kvurasai, so that you should be able to bring the mace to Kfuras Yisrael quicker. In order to speed up the Kfura, you're allowed to go travel on Yom Tov Sheni. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah over here. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Mem Aleph. You heard about a mace that's 4 or 5 days away, v'lo nitan lekfura, and nobody's bringing this mace to Kfura. And the Mishnah Berurah says, v'hayomunach bein ha'akum. This mace is laying in a non-Jewish neighborhood, and there are no Yidden over there to attend to the mace. It seems that what the Chavetz Chaim is saying is, if the mace is in a non-Jewish area, so then there's nobody to attend to the mace over there. If it's a Yiddish neighborhood, if you find out that there's a mace in another Yiddish neighborhood 3, 4, 5 days away, but it's a Yiddish neighborhood, so the Yidden over there will attend to the mace. But if you find out that there's a Yid 4 or 5 days away in a non-Jewish area where there are no Yidden to be metapel with the mace, so then it's upon you. So then it makes sense that you're going to go be mishtadel, you're going to go take care of the mace. Ice cut membez, the Mechaber said you're allowed to travel. You could start traveling on the second day of Yom Tov, lemaher kfurasai, in order to hurry up the kfura, in order to be able to bring the mace to Kfuras Yisrael quicker. Says the Chavetz Chaim here in Ice Cut Membez, even though, like I pointed out to you earlier in Sif Daled, the Mechaber said you're not allowed to do any malacha for the benefit of the mace, if you're not intending on making the kvura on that day on Yom Tov. Shani hacha, over here by this halacha it's different. Because now you're finding out about a mace, about a Yisrael, a Yid, a niftar, that's 4 or 5 days away. That means that this mace is going to be sitting over there for many days. v'hu meis mitzvah. And since there are no other Yidden over there, this mace has the din of a mace mitzvah. This is a mace mitzvah that there's a chiyuv on every member of Klal Yisrael to take care of that mace. There's a mace sitting alone without being attended to. V'tzarech l'mayir kol ma de'efsher, and therefore we have to rush as much as humanly possible, kedei shelo yisnavel, so that the mace should not come to tremendous bezoyin. There shouldn't be a nivol hameis. The Kosev of Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, Umiyu, however, Imunah Shama Babayis Ein Lahakil. It's the opinion of the Magen Avram that if the mace is protected in a house, Ein Lahakil, V'ayin B'bir Halacha Masha Kasavnu Bazeh. We have a lengthy Bir Halacha over here who discusses this in greater detail. Okay. Now we go to the Ramah, 4 lines from the top of the Shulchan Aruch, says the Ramah, Hagah. Umuter lahavi meis b'yom tov sheni michutz l'tchum ha'ir l'kavroi b'kfuras Yisrael. Let's say there's a mace that's located outside of the city limits. Indeed, the mace is located outside of the tchum. And there's a Beis HaChaim here in the city within the tchum. So you want to go out of the tchum to go get the mace, to bring the mace in to be able to do kvura. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to go bring the mace from outside of the tchum. Even though technically speaking, you could go over to the mace and bury the mace right where the mace is. No, the halacha is you're allowed to bring the mace back into the tchum in order to make kvura over here in the city. Brings this down from the Beis Yosef in the name of the Rashba. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It's cut in Mem Gimel. Now the truth is, the Chavetz Chaim mentions right away, the Mechaber already said this halacha. Again, in Sif Dalid, we already had this halacha. We said that you're allowed, where's the exact words? On Kuf Mem Vav Amid Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom, right by the Ois Katan Chav Beis for the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber wrote, Ve'im ein ba'oisa ha'ir mekayim kavaris liYisrael. If a niftar is located in a city where there isn't a Beis HaChaim, a Yiddish Beis HaChaim, you're allowed to transport the mace, even outside of the Tchum, to bring him to a Yiddish Beis HaChaim. So what exactly is the Chiddush of the Ramah over here? The Ramah over here says, you're allowed to go out of your city to where there's a mace located and bring the mace from outside of the Tchum into the Tchum in order to do Kfuras Yisrael. It doesn't seem to be a bigger Chiddush than what the Mechaber already said in Sif Dalet. So says the Chavetz Chaim, here in Mem Gimel, Kvar Kosav Keina Mechaber b'Sif Dalet. In reality, the Mechaber already stated this halacha previously in Sif Dalet. V'loi Chazar HaRamah u'Kesavai, and the Ramah only repeated it and wrote it again over here, Elimishum Chidushai, because there is an additional novelty, there is an additional chiddush that we have over here in our Sif. What's that? Da'afilu ein hameis kan. Over there in Sif Dalid, we were talking about a case where there's a mace, there's a niftar where you're located. And the problem is that you don't have a Yiddish Beis HaKvaris to bury him in. So the halacha the Mechaber said was you could take the mace and you could transport the mace from your city to outside of the Tchum to a location where there is a Yiddish Beis HaChaim. That's not the halacha that the Ramah is telling you over here. Over here the Ramah is telling you you're in a location where there is no mace. The mace is located away outside of the city, outside of the Tchum. What you're going to do is you're going to travel to the mace and then bring the mace back. That's an additional chiddush, says the Chavetz Chaim. Da'afilu ein hameis kan. Even though the mace is not over here where you are, you just found out that there is a mace mitzvah located outside of the tchum. You're allowed to travel outside of the tchum without a mace, because the mace is over there. In order to bring the mace from outside of the tchum back to the city, so that you should be able to make the kvura on Yom Tov in a Yiddish Beis HaChaim. Why is that a bigger chiddush? I think the reason it's a bigger chiddush is because in the Mechaber's case in Sif Dalid, what happened? You're in the city, somebody died, you have a niftar, you're going to take the niftar, and together with the niftar, you're going to travel outside of the Tchum to bring him to Kever Yisrael. But over there, you're traveling with a mace. Anybody who sees you knows right away that what you're doing is l'tzarech hameis, that you're busy in order to take care of a mace. So they understand why you're traveling outside of the Tchum on Yom Tov. But in our case over here, you're traveling without a mace. So it's very easy to imagine somebody could see you and wonder what is it precisely that you're doing. Why are you traveling outside of the Tchum on Yom Tov? The Berurah Halacha comes to the conclusion that you should not use this kula unless the mace is going to be sitting where it is outside of the Tchum for a while, and it might come to B'zayin HaMace. Now we go to Sif Daled, 3 lines off the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch. Tinoik shemeis b'say shloishim. If Nebuch lo Aleinu, a baby died within 30 days of birth. Now, we know, generally speaking, we say that a baby, this is just a very general rule, a baby that lives less than 30 days is a nefel. That's a baby that was not a vlad kayama. It's not a viable birth. It's not a viable child. And that's why it died within 30 days. And the din of a nefel is not really considered a full life in the eyes of halacha to the extent of what you would be allowed to do to bring him to kever. Now over here the Mechaber says, Tinoik shemeis b'say shloishim. Let's say you had a tinoik, you had a baby, Nebuch, that died within the first 30 days of life, but im gamru sa'arai v'tziparnov, if the child seemed to be a fully developed child, so the baby had hair and the baby had nails, so the baby seems to be a fully developed baby. In that case, we don't look at this baby lahalacha as really being a nefel, hu becheskas ben kayama. We look at this child as if really it was a viable child. What happened? Why did the baby die within 30 days of birth? Something happened. He contracted a sickness. He got an infection. I don't know what. But some other siba, some other cause caused the baby to die, even though the baby was really a viable child. So, if he has fully developed hair and fully developed nails, so then we assume that it was a viable child, and therefore v'dinoi, the halacha of this child is kemeis gadol, the same exact din that applies to an adult that dies on Yom Tov. And therefore, if it's Yom Tov Rishon, you're allowed to do malacha through a non-Jew, and you're allowed to do a malacha that would only be an Issa D'Rabbanan. You're allowed to do a malacha she'ena gemura. So like you're allowed to be metaltal in the mace, and certainly you're allowed to boil up water for a tahara. All of these kind of things that we said previously you're allowed to do for an adult on Yom Tov Rishon, you would be allowed to do. And if it's Yom Tov Sheni, then like the Mechaber said earlier, according to the Mechaber, Yom Tov Sheni shavua kechayel eit salames. Yom Tov Sheni is like a weekday, and you could even do a malacha gemura. You could sow tachrichin, you could dig a kever on behalf of this child, because it's a ben kayama. So v'dina kemeis gadol, afal pi she'einanu yodim u'kalu loy chadashav. And this is true even if we don't know precisely how many months the mother was expectant with this child. In other words, we don't know for sure that he was a full-term baby. Doesn't matter. If we see that he seems to be fully developed, we treat it like an adult. The roiv nashim yoldais vlad kayama. The fact is that we go basar roiv. Most women, Baruch Hashem, when they have a baby, it's a vlad kayama. It's a viable child. So we look at this child and we say, okay, we assume that this was also a viable child. And therefore we give him the same halacha that we would give to an adult mace. Says the Mishnah Berurah Nice Cotton Mem Daled. Tinoik shemes, Pirush, the explanation of this is, the nefalim, if we would look at this baby as being a nefel, if we would look at him as being non-viable, ein kaiver naisan b'yom tov, then the halacha would be that we're not allowed to make kever. We're not allowed to do kvura for a nefel on Yom Tov. Va'afilu al yedei amamin. We wouldn't even be allowed to ask a non-Jew to make the kvura for a baby that's a nefel, for a baby that wasn't viable. Shareihem ke'even, because the halachic status of a vlad that's not viable, of a nefel, when it comes to the halachas of Shabbos and Yom Tov, is ke'even. We look at it as a stone. It's like muktzah machmas gufay, v'asurim af betiltel. You're not even allowed to handle that vlad. But over here the Mechaber is telling me, this baby that died within 30 days, we do not look at this baby as being a nefel. We assume that this baby was a vlad kayama. Aiskat memhei, im gamru sa'arai, if he had fully developed hair and nails, so we look at it as an adult, fully viable. Ubeloi gamru, but if the baby does not have fully developed hair and nails, then afilu meis b'yom shloishim gufa, even if this baby would expire on day 30, so he made it all the way to day 30, Einoi b'cheskes ben kayama, we do not give that child the din of a viable baby, v'dinoi kenefel, we would look at that child as being a nefel, and we would not be allowed to do kvura on that baby, even through a non-Jew, and indeed that baby would be aser b'tiltel. Okay, I've cut memvav, but in the baby that we're discussing, the baby that does seem to be fully developed, v'dinoi kemeis gadol, that baby would have the same din as an adult nebuch that died. V'nikbar b'yom rishon al yedei akum, and on the first day Yom Tov you would be allowed to make the kvura through a non-Jew. You could have a non-Jew dig the kever, put the mace into the kever, and fill the kever back up. Or b'yom sheni al yedei Yisrael, and according to the Mechaber for sure, if it would be the second day Yom Tov, even a Yid would be allowed to dig the kever and fill in the kever, even though it's a malacha gemura, because Yom Tov sheni asau kechol legabe ames. Eis cotton mem zayin. The Mechaber said this is true, even if we don't know if this baby was full term or not. It doesn't matter. The roiv noshim yoldais vlad kayama, because we go basaroiv, and we say most women, when they give birth, the baby, Baruch Hashem, the vlad is a ben kayama, is a viable baby. Umisasa, so you'll ask me, if the baby is not an eiffel, if the baby was viable, so why did the baby die within 30 days? Says the Chavetz Chaim, because we would say, Umisasa talinon be'ezesiba. We would say the baby died for some other reason. He contracted an infection. I don't know. V'yesh chalkin bazeh. However, the Chavetz Chaim says there are those who disagree with this. The Kevin Demes, because they say, look, you want to say that the baby is a viable child? He died within 30 days. So v'yesh chalkin bazeh. There are those who disagree with this. And they say the Kevin Demes, we see that this baby died, Isra Ruba. So that's a weakness in the argument of Roiv. You can't use the argument of Roiv over here to me. You see that the baby didn't live. The Haroiv b'nei Kayama ain't a mesim b'sayshleishim. You're using a Roiv to tell me that Roiv women, when they have a Vlad, it's a Vlad ben Kayama. But Roiv Vlad ben Kayamas don't die within 30 days. So it's very hard to use the argument of Roiv over here. It would seem that this baby is an Eiffel. The Yesh Lahachmer, the Chavetz Chaim says there is room over here to rule stringently. Lekavrai al yedei akum, and this kvura should be done by Amira la'akum, by asking a non-Jew to make the kvura. Umiu al yedei akum efshel lahater afilu b'loy gamru sarai. But when it comes to using a non-Jew, then you don't even have to have that the hair and the nails are fully developed. I'll call panamu safik ben kayama, because still it's a safik ben kayama. So if you have a safik ben kayama and you have a mira la'akum, you could go ahead and do the kvura. Sif Yud. The Mechaber says, Nefolim, the din of a nefel. Now, right away I have to stop, because the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us in Eiskat Mem Ches that this Mechaber is a drop misleading. When the Mechaber starts off this sif and he says that he's addressing the din of a nefel, he means the same exact type of tinoik that we were discussing in Sif Tes. We're talking about the tinoik that died within 30 days, who seems to be fully developed, and we're not giving him the din of a nefel. We're giving him the din of adult, and we're going to be willing to make the kvura on Yom Tov if it's Yom Rishon through a non-Jew, and if it's Yom Tov Sheni through a Yid. That's the baby that we're talking about over here. Why does the Mechaber call him a nefel? Because he died within 30 days. But he doesn't mean a bona fide nefel, and we'll see how we know that in a moment. The Mechaber says nefalim, such kind of babies that died within Nebuch 30 days, but they're fully developed, and therefore we're matter you to make a kvura, shenagu lahasir arlasan bitzror even oy bekane, and we know that when a baby dies, if a baby dies and there was not yet a chance to bring the baby to a bris milah, let's say a baby was born and for some reason you couldn't do a bris, maybe he was a preemie, maybe the male said he's too weak, maybe the baby was yellow, or maybe you can't give this baby a milah because he has brothers that died machmas milah, so you can't give this baby a milah. So the minig is that when you bring this baby to kvura, so this baby died within 30 days, now you're going to go do the kvura, the minig was to cut off the arla, to cut off the milah, using not a kashera, you don't do a kashera milah with a sakin and everything else, you take either some kind of a stone or a sharp reed, and you cut off the arla, and you throw the arla into the kever, you bury that piece of skin, you bury the arla together with the baby. That's the minig. There are various reasons brought down for the minig. One reason that's brought down, interestingly enough, is that the Poishei Yisrael, Yidden that did Averis, the truth is it's this week's Parsha. We have Parshas Vayera, but Avram Avinu just came out from the Milah. In the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, Avram Avinu mauled himself, and now at the beginning of Parshas Vayera, he was sitting Pesach HaOyel, and the Rebbeinu Shalom came to Avram Avinu to be Mavakeh Chayla. And we know the famous Maamar Chazal, that Chazal tell us that Avram Avinu sits al Pesach Gehenim. He sits outside Gehenim, and if Nebuch, they bring a Yid to Gehenim to put him in Gehenim, Avram Avinu checks, and Avram Avinu says if he has a Milah, he doesn't let them throw this Yid into Gehenim. He says, this is my bris with the Rebbeinu Shalom. This is a child of mine. I see he has a Milah. He followed my bris. I'm not letting you throw him into Gehenim. But there's a kunz. The truth is, it's not always a mile for somebody not to go to Gehenim. I know that sounds harsh, but somebody needs a kapara. He's going to get the kapara from Gehenim. So he needs Gehenim. So there's a kunz to get the person in Gehenim. The kunz is that if a baby died before he was zeichet to have a milah, so then that orla, they would take that orla and put that orla on this yid who was a Poishei Yisrael. This yid who was a balavera, they take the orla from that baby and they put it on to this person, and now he could go into Gehenim. So in order to prevent that from happening, we do a milah and we remove the milah from the baby, so that in Shemayim they don't find an orla to take from that baby and put on to the Poishei Yisrael. This is what I call boogeyman stuff. We don't know the true meaning of these kind of things, but there is such a concept brought down. But in any case, this is the halacha and the minig that the Mechaber is addressing over here. And he says, Nephalim. So this baby that we had in Siftes, who died within 30 days, but he seems to be fully developed, and therefore we're mater kvura, and we have this minig to cut off the arla before we put the baby into the kever, and to throw the arla into the kever. Shenagu lahaser arlasan bitzrar evanai bekane. Aser afilu b'Yom Tov Sheni shel Golius. Even on Yom Tov Sheni, you're not allowed to do that act of cutting off the arla. Why not? The truth is that that's not an isser of making a chabura. It's not a tolda of the av malacha of sheichet, because on a dead body you don't make a chabura. It's what we call chituch basar ba'alma. All you're doing is cutting a piece of flesh, but there's no isser malacha. But it's uvdin dechol, and it's terchi yisera. There's no reason to do it. And it's not a tzarech hakvura. You don't need to do this in order to facilitate the kvura. It's only a minig. Therefore, says the Mechaber, Aser afilu b'Yom Tov Sheni shel Golius, it would be forbidden even on Yom Tov Sheni shel Golius to do that act of cutting off the arla. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois cut memches on the bottom of Kuf Mem Zayin on the base. Nephalim, nire, like I spoke out, the Chavetz Chaim says, nire, it seems, the lav bin nephalim vadoim kamar. We're not talking about a real nafel that was not a viable child. Taha'inu also lekavram b'Yom Tov. Because we said that a real nafel that's not viable, you're not allowed to do a kvura on Yom Tov. We said it's like an even, it's like a stone. We're only matter you to do a kvura on a baby that died Teich Shloshim if he seems to be fully developed, and we figured he's not really a nafel. He died for some zaitika reason. But a real nafel, you can't do kvura. So how could this sif be talking about a real nafel? V'im kein b'lavach ilay shayich l'malon. The hamalon on al-kivron. We don't need the mechaber to tell you a halacha that you can't make this milah. You can't cut the arla off of this baby on Yom Tov. This baby, if we're talking about a baby that's a real nefel, you're not going to make a kvura on Yom Tov. And you cut off the arla when you do the kvura. So obviously we're not talking about a real nefel. There wouldn't be a kvura by a real nefel. So then, what is this sif talking about? So the Mishnah Berurah continues here on the top line, Kuf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. Ella on the following the sif teskoi. The mechaber over here is addressing the same kind of baby that he addressed in sif tes. He's talking about the baby that seems to be fully developed, and therefore we give him the din of a ben kayama, and therefore we matir the kvura. And what the mechaber is telling you is, even though we were matir the kvura, we're not going to be matir you to cut off the arla, because that's not tzarchi kvura. Umetaplin b'kvurasim b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to do the kvura on this baby on Yom Tov. Fa'afilu hachi, but still, so even though lekayim aminig lemulan, you want to go ahead and fulfill the minig to cut off the arla, ein lahatir. That we can't be matir. She'ein zeh mitzarchi kvura, because that's not part of tzarchi kvura. There's no reason for us to be matir that. So that's going to remain aser. Now we go to the Ramah on the top line of Kuf Mem Ches Amud Aleph. And again, the words of the Ramah right away are going to seem a little bit strange. Says the Ramah Hagah, Va'asr lekavroi b'Yom Tov, and you're not allowed to bury this baby on Yom Tov. Now, the Chavetz Chaim is going to say right away in the Mishnah, whoa, what are you talking about? I just told you that the mechaber in this sif is talking about the baby of sif tes. The baby of sif tes who's fully developed, you are allowed to do the kvura on Yom Tov. And the Ramah didn't argue on the mechaber in sif tes. So if the Ramah didn't argue on the mechaber in sif tes, the Ramah is not going to argue on the mechaber over here. We're talking about the same baby. If that baby was mutter to bury him in sif tes, it's mutter to bury him here in sif yud. So what does the Ramah mean that you're not allowed to bury him? So we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah, but l'chol hapachas the Ramah says, "Va'asr lekavroi b'Yom Tov." You're not allowed to bury this baby on Yom Tov. Ela manichai ad lemachar. Rather, you wait until tomorrow after Yom Tov and you bury him after Yom Tov. Now let's see what the Mishnah Berurah does with this Ramah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut memtes. Va'asr lekavroi. You're not allowed to bury this child. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "Lefi mashe be'arnu divrei hamechaber." According to the way that we explained the words of the mechaber. And we said that the mechaber over here in Sif Yud is addressing the same baby as Sif Tes, a fully developed baby that you are allowed to do kvura, then ein divrei haramah medukdakin kolkach. Then the words of the Ramah don't seem to be very precise over here. Sharei ahad Sif Tes like polig Ramah. The Ramah didn't argue on Sif Tes. In Sif Tes he didn't say you're not allowed to bury this baby. So why is he telling me over here you're not allowed to bury this baby? So the Chavetz Chaim throws out a possible answer to this question. Im loy mishum, it could be that the reason the Ramah wrote this over here in Sif Yud is you're right. The mechaber in Sif Yud is talking about the same baby as Sif Tes. And the Ramah agrees that you are allowed to bury that baby. So what does the Ramah mean over here when he says v'asr lekavroi, that you're not allowed to bury this baby on Yom Tov? What does he mean? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Im loy mishum da mechaber sasam, the mechaber, the way he wrote it in a closed way. The ka'amar, and he said nifolim. Like I explained when we started reading Sif Yud, the mechaber seems to be a little bit misleading. The mechaber started the Sif, and he said, I'm talking about nifolim. Now, we said the mechaber can't be talking about a real nefel. A real nefel you're not allowed to bury on Yom Tov. So he explained that the mechaber means the nefel of Sif Tes, the fully developed baby that we assume is not really a nefel. So why are we calling him a nefel? Because he died within 30 days. That's why we're calling him a nefel. But the Ramah saw that, and the Ramah said, from the fact that the mechaber wrote it the way he wrote it, and he wrote the word nefolim, somebody could make a big mistake. Somebody is going to look at this mechaber, and they're going to think that over here in Sif Yud, we're talking about a real nefel. And they're going to say, oh, so the mechaber holds that you're allowed to bury a real nefel. Because obviously, The Mechaber is saying you're going to bury him. The Mechaber is saying the only thing you're not allowed to do is cut off the arla. But I guess to bury him, you're allowed to bury him. So the Ramah was afraid that a mistake was going to come out of this sif from the way the Mechaber wrote it. Therefore, the Ramah writes over here in his Hagah, if we're talking about a real nefel, v'asal l'kavrei b'Yom you're not allowed to bury a real nefel on Yom Tov. Let's see it inside in the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim, the way he writes it is, lost the place. The Ramah saw that the Mechaber wrote the word nefalim. So that you shouldn't make a mistake, and you shouldn't think that the Mechaber is talking about a real nefel. And the halacha that he's telling you is that by a real nefel, you're only not allowed to cut off the arla, but you are allowed to make the kvura. You might make such a mistake. Kamash Malan comes the Ramah to teach me the Misha who becheskas nefel, that somebody who's a real nefel, gam lekavrei aser. Not only are you not allowed to cut off the arla, you're not even allowed to do the kvura. So that's one explanation that the Chavetz Chaim has. V'oid yesh laimar, you also could say, the gam besafik nefel, kahi desif test das Ramah shemutav laniak v'rasi alach Yom Tov. Could be that the Ramah Taka holds that even by a real nefel, it's not usher to make the kvura, but it would be better to make the kvura after Yom Tov. Kadesha Yasser or Lasai Lifnei Kvura. Why? Could be that what the Ramah was saying is, yes, Me'ikar Adin, really, if the baby is the sif test type of baby, Me'ikar Adin, you are allowed to make the kvura. But we have a problem. The problem is the halach of sif yud. The problem is, since this baby of sif test is at least a suffix nefel, and therefore we're not going to be matter you to cut off the arla, and there is a minig to cut off the arla, therefore I don't want you to make the kvura on Yom Tov. Because if you make the kvura on Yom Tov, you're going to end up making the kvura without cutting off the arla. So instead, wait until after Yom Tov, make the kvura after Yom Tov, and cut off the arla. Maybe that's what the Ramah holds. That's what the Chavetz Chaim is saying here. V'oid yesh larmar, you could say, the gam besafik nefel, kai he desif test, das Ramah shabutav laniach kvurasi alach Yom Tov, kadesh yaser alasi lefnei kvura. Maybe the Ramah Taka holds that by a suffix nefel, like the baby of sif test, it's better to push the kvura off until after Yom Tov, so that you should be able to cut off the arla. V'loi kavrin suffix nefel, ele b'meis la'ach shamalu oisai. And the baby of sif test, we're not going to make a kvura on Yom Tov unless that baby died after day 8 and it seemed to be a healthy baby, so you already had a milah. If you already had a milah, so now you could bury him on Yom Tov. Oy ben a keva. Or you're talking about a girl. Oy ben nefel nekeva. The chen kasa ez achrayim, and some achrayim taka explain the Ramah this way. Miu, however, betinoik shaloi malu oisai machmas chayli. Let's say you had a baby that didn't have a milah because he was unwell. And now this baby died after 30 days. So now you have a baby that there's no reason at all to have a suffix that this baby wasn't viable. This baby lived 50 days, no problem. 50, not 15, 50. This baby lived 50 days. So the baby was definitely a viable baby. There's not even a suffix nefel. But you never gave this baby a bris milah. Somehow the baby was never well enough to have a bris milah. And now the baby died on Yom Tov. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, bevadai kavrin oisai b'Yom Tov, that baby you do the kvura on Yom Tov, of course, it has the same din as an adult. It's a viable baby. So you do that kvura on Yom Tov, umesirin oz gamar losai. And on that baby, you can fulfill the minig of cutting off the arla. Why? It still does. The Mishnah Berurah told us before, the reason you're not allowed to cut off the arla off the suffix nefel is because it's not a tzarich kvura, it's only a minig, so we're not going to be, it's uvdin dechayel, it's terchi yisera, we're not materet on Yom Tov. How come over here we are materet? So it seems that the reason we're not materet by a suffix nefel is because over there are already so many sfeikas. We don't know if this baby was really a viable baby. It's Yom Tov, it's Ovda the Chayil, it's Terchi Yisera. But if we know for sure that the baby is viable, so this was a fully viable child. Over there's a very strong minig to cut off the arla. That's considered part of the package of bringing a fully fledged Yisrael to Kvura, and this baby is a fully developed, a full-fledged Yisrael. So we have to cut off the arla. It would be a big bizi ames if we didn't cut off the arla. V'da, and finally the Mishnah says you should know the Yesh ben Achrayim. There are those Achrayim shacholkin ha'ikar dinei d'nefalim who argue on this whole din of a nefel. Uladitu, and according to them, kavuras nefalim nami mitzvah, even burying a baby that's a full-fledged nefel, a baby that was not fully developed and died less than 30 days. There's every argument in the world that this baby was never viable. It was a nefel. Still, the kvura is a mitzvah. And therefore, there's an argument to make that at least on Yom Tov Sheni, we would make the kvura of such a baby through a non-Jew. Okay, we covered most of Kuf Mem Ches Amud Aleph because we covered most of the Mishnah Berurah. So hopefully it will go very fast, and I am hopeful that by our next shir, which I guess will be on Sunday, we will catch up to the Dirshu schedule. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. The schus of limud HaTorah should stand ganz Klal Yisrael in good stead. We should only have Besuras Tovos and Simchas. We shouldn't hear of any more Tsaras Nebuch. Everybody be well.